That was one of the big moments for me, was going into the Capitol and seeing some of the debates they were having on the floor. And they were talking about, something very boring, but at the base of it, it was about justice. And that's why Texas Right to Life was so amazing to me, is because they were helping these elected officials who I thought were the heroes. I realized they weren't really the heroes. They're important, but they weren't doing the research, learning talking points, figuring out the strategy of bills to make a difference, to protect, regular Texans. And so that's I was like, okay, that's where the work really is getting done behind the scenes. That's why I was so attracted to this work.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans? Welcome to this edition of Real Texans, where we chat with the men and women of the Lone Star State who are doing great things to make Texas better. And so it's great to sit down with my friend John Seago, who is the president of Texas Right to Life. John, you've been with Texas Right to Life for almost 2 decades now.
That's true. I've first volunteered with them in 2004, but I've been full-time since 2008.
And became president in 22.
Right.
We'll talk about kind of recent stuff.
Yeah.
Grew up in the Houston area.
Mm-hmm.
Your dad was a pastor.
Yeah.
Walk me through how growing up as a pastor's kid didn't just send you off into left loony land. Instead, you kind of, went into a kind of ministry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So grew up, my dad was a Baptist pastor, so we moved around Houston, different churches there. My parents were always very pro-life and plugged into early, late 80s, early 90s pro-life scene in Houston, downtown Houston, rough, kind of area, and just out there praying outside of abortion clinics, ministering to women, working with pregnancy centers, all kinds of stuff. There's a lot of great stories there. Some I can't tell you on camera. A lot of great time. And so I was always pro-life. I was always Christian, grew up, with a Christian worldview. So that was kind of what even got this onto my radar.
So, but what was it took it from being this is a way that our family engage in the community. This is maybe something, you do as a volunteer. What was it that made you want to do this, with all of your time?
Yeah. Well, so, in God's providence, I was exposed to this. I had these views, and I started studying, kind of Christian worldview stuff, and knowing how broken the world was and knowing how the government was designed to be a tool for good. I had questions. I knew my parents were tied into Texas Right to Life somehow, and I heard they were involved in politics. And I was like, how does a Christian do that? And so that was my first, kind of curiosity, was how does a Christian influence politics? And that's whenever I volunteered with Right to Life, doing research for them, shadowing them in the Capitol. And I was blown away at just the impact a few faithful Christians could have, even in something as big as the Texas government.
When we talk about the pro-life issue, many other issues, and you use this phrase, you use this word multiple times just now, worldview.
Right.
Worldview. Why is worldview so critical when we look at government? Because we tend to look at government, it's kind of nuts and bolts, but worldview really matters, doesn't it?
That was one of the big moments for me, was going into the Capitol and seeing some of the debates they were having on the floor. And they were talking about, something very boring, but at the base of it, it was about justice. It was about what you deserve, what I deserve, what the government can require of people. And I was like, these are bigger conversations that these guys who are just, saying their talking points aren't really engaging in the depth of what's actually at stake here in this building. And so I was kind of just overwhelmed at, if there is nobody that is guiding those conversations, if there is nobody that is assisting that politician on his position and, what the policy should be, it's going to go off the rails. And that's why Texas Right to Life was so amazing to me, is because they were helping these elected officials who I thought were the heroes. I realized they weren't really the heroes. They're important, but they weren't doing the research, learning the talking points, figuring out the strategy of bills to make a difference to protect, regular Texans. And so that's kind of, I was like, okay, that's where the work really is getting done behind the scenes. That's why I was so attracted to this work.
Texas Right to Life has long been known as an organization that, when we think of the Right to Life movement, you think, okay, you want to stop abortion. But Texas Right to Life has been in some ways unique, not completely, but some ways unique in looking at kind of this full spectrum of life. Whether it's certainly the abortion issue, also neonatal care, all the way through to the way we treat the kind of dignity with which we treat people at the end of their life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that worldview really is a very comprehensive thing, not just we don't like this particular policy.
Yeah, no, and that was one of the things that has been really important to Texas Right to Life is, our mission statement. If we, as being Christians, we see if we start with, creation order, God creating human beings as the valuable kind of entity in the world. They're at the top, of creation. They're the crown of creation. If they really are important, there are a lot of areas where they're being undermined. They're being attacked. And so we looked at, yes, abortion is just one of the most obvious attacks on human beings, but there's also, biotech research. There's also, stem cell research. We were in those debates. There's also at the, kind of end of life debates that you're talking about is how do we treat vulnerable patients when secular culture says they're of no use to us anymore.
Useless eater.
Yeah, they can't, raise any, they can't make any money, they can't provide for their families. We should just be able to make a utilitarian call. They don't have any value. Well, as a Christian, that doesn't fit. And so Texas Right to Life has been involved in a lot of these fights, and actually those fights about patients in the hospital were some of the most politically complicated, confusing for regular pro-lifers issues. That's why I went back to school, ended up getting my master's and my doctorate in bioethics, because I realized the pro-life view was not being represented in this new academic field that sounded really fancy of bioethics. Right. And that's when I went back there to be consistent, like you're saying, applying our pro-life principles to all of these issues, not just opposing the violence of abortion.
When we look at the 10 Commandments and we see that thou shalt not murder. A pastor of mine at one point had, in a sermon series, had kind of explained that one helpful way to look at things, look at the obverse and what's the opposite, right? And it's not just enough that that Seago doesn't kill Sullivan, which I would appreciate that. But that there's something more to that. It's it's the celebrating life. It's the protecting life. It's the not just tolerating life, but encouraging life. And that's where, in some ways, even the pro-life culture, having gotten so hyper fixated on Roe v. Wade, we got started seeing not seeing the forest for the trees in some ways.
No, you're absolutely right. Is Scripture, being a Baptist, Scripture was central to all of these conversations, and it is rich. It is not just a simple, thou shalt not. And so, okay, we should go make laws that reflect that. I mean, when you look at the 10 Commandments, it's really family rules. God is talking to his people, and he's really showing them his character. And then he says, be like me. And so, I mean, it's really a lot more, it's a lot deeper than, some of the conversations we have in public about this. But you're absolutely right, it is more important, for us to really embody this ethic, embody these principles, and, create a culture that values life, create a culture that stops violence, of course, that's kind of the bare minimum, right. But also doing good and promoting the pro-life vision that God has for us. And so it is a lot bigger of a project than just not murdering your neighbor.
You became president of Texas Right to Life in 2022, coinciding, maybe because you became president, coinciding with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And a lot of folks out there looking at the end of Roe v. Wade, a lot of our friends saying, oh, well, okay, we've won, we're done, we're going to wash hands, walk away. Texas Right to Life hasn't closed up shop yet.
I wish we could. Absolutely. I mean, honestly, I really do. And we joke about that at the office is, Lord willing, one day we can, lock the doors. But the reality is that the enemy is still focused on Texas, and the enemy is still promoting abortion in Texas, not even to mention the other issues, just on abortion. And they are adapting their strategy to how do we still promote abortion in Texas. And so we see new trends, new strategies, and we're trying to react to that. And so at Texas Right to Life, we go to work every day to, protect innocent human life from attacks and also to build a pro-life culture. And unfortunately, those two tasks are desperately needed right now in the post Roe v. Wade era. And so we just passed a huge bill to address abortion pills being mailed into the state. Well, that's because we were looking at what the enemy is doing and saying, okay, now we got to protect life from this attack.
Well, it's been very fascinating. There are others who claim to be pro-life, who have, who took a very much we're not going to ask for anything big. We're not going to over the years. We just have to live with Roe v. Wade.
Right.
We'll just do marches and we'll pray and from abortion. It's all very important stuff. But at Right to Life, you guys were talking about how do we make sure we take advantage of every possible opportunity,
right?
And even moving away from government to individuals. That's where kind of the two big innovations that we've seen: the heartbeat bill, and now this prohibition on the abortive things being mailed.
Yep.
Where these are now civil actions where individuals can go to court over, rather than just counting on your local DA to do it.
Right. We feel called by the Lord to oppose abortion. We feel called by the Lord to take a stand in government and promote righteous laws. But we also feel called to do it in a prudent way. And so we always, so it's not just what we're fighting for is defined by the Bible, it's how we're doing it. Right. And so we want to be the most strategic, the most, effective in what we do. And we have found that the old way of thinking, criminal penalties and administrative penalties, taking license away from doctors, that is not working. The enemy has kind of is going around those. And so we needed to come up with a new strategic avenue, and civil liability that you mentioned is really the best tool we have on the table. And if anybody doesn't like that, some of our conservative friends don't like more lawsuits, right? And I say, hey, I don't either. If you have a better tool, show me where it is, right? And we'll use it, because at the end of the day, my goal is to save lives, to protect babies from abortion, to protect women from the harm of abortion. And if you can give me a better policy, but right now, the most efficient policy we have found is allowing citizens, these crazy pro-lifers like you and me, to be able to sue those we know are breaking the law. And that has been efficient with the Heartbeat Act. It's been effective with House Bill 7, the new pro-life bill that we just passed. And so, we're going to use every tool we can to save lives.
And to me, it goes to in what I was watching the Heartbeat bill, now watching House Bill 7 move with the abortifacient drugs. It married so nicely with the discussions you and I have had over the years about this culture of life, where you are kind of counting on culture. We need a strong man we need one guy and he'll protect all the babies. Well, no, it's all of our job, right?
Right.
And you guys have taken that very seriously for as long as I've tracked Texas Right to Life and your work on college and university campuses. Tell me about the program you'll do with students and trying to, y'all are on what? I think you told me 19, 20 campuses. It's not like you hire all those people and they're done. You're building something besides just possible future employees, right?
Right. Yeah, one of the best things the organization did that I can't take any credit for is starting a college.
Oh, come on. You go and take credit for it.
I can't take credit for Roe being overturned, and I can't take credit for this one. But we started a college scholarship program that said we want to train and mentor students to be pro-life leaders. And because, you and I don't know how long the Lord is going to keep us in the fight. And we want ultimate victory. We want, better progress than just what you and I can accomplish. And so we started building up a pro-life army around the state, training these college students and mentoring them to be pro-life leaders. And so right now, after 20 years of this program, we have, people that we trained, that we mentored, leading important teams at the AG's office, leading pregnancy centers around the state, helping with national pro-life groups. We've got them all over the country right now, leading these efforts to stand for life, to make progress in policy and in serving their communities, and then in the courthouse. Of course, there's a lot of great things, but that's because we said we will invest in not just saying, here's some money, good luck, but actually mentoring these students and preparing them for the calling that the Lord has on their life.
You mentioned ago some of the big fights that y'all have had. And in many ways, I think, the people yelling and screaming at each other in the rotunda or whatever that might be. Okay, that's interesting, but it's usually just a circus. But the real fights that we've seen over the years, the things that maybe been the most bloody, the most damaging in terms of people's how they can sleep at night. And other things have been those fights where hospitals have been trying to pull the plug on someone.
Right.
They've been trying to kind of move people along. Where in those cases you're really counting on lawyers who you've never met, doctors who will never see the patient, all these kind of people.
Right.
Having a pro-life worldview.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is one of the areas when we start applying our pro-life principles to these other areas, there are unclaimed territories, right? So when it comes to the abortion fight, even Republicans that don't actually have the same values that you and I do, they know they have to vote a certain way. Whenever it comes to these other areas, it's unclaimed territory. And so we're fighting with people that may oppose abortion, but they have this different worldview that is not shaped by the Bible, that is not shaped by Christian theology and the view that every human being has dignity no matter, what they're capable of, no matter their life expectancy or their size. And so that's really where some of the most difficult fights have been, is applying those pro-life principles to hospitals. And so, some of the hardest primaries that we've fought in, some of the most difficult court cases that we've had is protecting life whenever it is being kind of undermined and attacked in a hospital, in a medical ethics situation, rather than in the Capitol over some specific bill. And so that's really been a unique thing for Texas Right to Life, is we're going to say these are our principles, and it's going to take us to some really uncomfortable and, politically dangerous, territories where it's like, hey, we're just trying to be pro-life. If that doesn't line up with the specific politics of the day, that's too bad.
And in some cases, that has cost you guys in terms of donors, in terms of esteem at the Capitol and other places where it would be easier at times to go along with some of these policies.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. Every single session, and I reluctantly admit I've been involved in 9 sessions now. Every single session, there are decision points of, do we stand here and make people uncomfortable, or do we just say, okay, I'm going to let that one slide. Maybe you'll do me a favor later on. One of the highlights of my career is sitting down with the governor and telling him that a pro-life bill he has already done press conferences on and has already put a PR out on is not a priority for us because it doesn't meet our standards. It won't actually save lives. It may sound good, but it won't actually save lives. And did it in a very respectful way, invited him to work on, effective legislation. But that's kind of whenever we go principles first, whenever we go, what is the Bible telling us to do first, and then, try to apply political prudence, it may put you in some awkward situations.
There's the push in politics, and I often agree with this idea of kind of incremental change. I think right to life in some ways kind of the forefront of that in the pro-life movement.
Right.
But incremental does mean movement, and it doesn't mean press releases.
Right.
It means movement. It doesn't mean flattery. It means actual change.
This is one of the biggest debates that we have to have in the Capitol. Is yes, incrementalism only works if you know where you're going and you're taking steps in that direction. And so we stopped using the word incremental and started calling it prudence or prudent incrementalism, is because there were bills that were filed that would take you one step, but in the wrong direction, or one step sideways. And so, we have been working at how do we overturn Roe v. Wade? And in Texas Right to Life, we would always see where is just outside of reach for this specific political body, what is going to be tough. We're going to have to whip votes. We're going to have to put pressure on them back in their districts. We're going to have to really work hard to make the case. And then also that is going to save lives, that is going to help us in these court battles and give us long-term, kind of results. We came up with a very specific criteria we used, which allowed me to sit down with the governor and say, hey, that bill doesn't meet, our criteria. But you're absolutely right, is taking one step at a time only works if you know where you're going and the, step that you're taking is actually effective.
How can folks, if someone knows a young person who might be interested in participating in the fellows program, how can they find out about that? And where can they learn more about Texas Right to Life? Yeah,
TexasRightToLife.com has a student center where you can click on there and see all the programs, all the opportunities that we offer students. I mean, that is something we really want to invest in is, how do we get this passion? How do we get this, training starting earlier and earlier for students? And so high school students, college students, we have some education events in the summer where, we have big conferences and come and try to train people. So TexasRightToLife.com is where they can find everything on that. You'll also see updates about what's going on in the Capitol, fights that we have in courthouses. Our movement is having to pay more and more attention to litigation, to fights in the courtroom. And you'll find updates about that at TexasRightToLife.com.
Last question for you before I let you go. What are practical things that folks who maybe can't come to Austin during a legislative session? What are things that people though can do to help build that culture of life that we've talked about? What are the steps that folks need to be kind of thinking about? What are the questions they need to be asking? What resources should be available to them?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're at a really important moment because a lot of the pro-life Christians are having the questions you asked earlier about where are we? Where is the movement? And so, having Christians start this conversation at their church, continuing to encourage their pastor to talk about these issues. We've had friends that have started Bible studies to talk about these, invited us to their church to come and do presentations on what the life kind of fight looks like right now. You have that. You have, kind of the kind of investment in paying attention to what Texas is doing, what's going on in Congress. Texas Right to Life, we expect a lot out of Congress. Unfortunately, they never deliver, but we don't let them off the hook, right? There's important things to do. So engaging the political scene, but most importantly, being an ambassador for life at your church, at your community, and really making sure we can't ignore this issue because it has huge consequences if we do.
Dr. John Seago, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you for joining this edition of Real Texans.